1957, and I've come to the movie that I consider to be my favourite for that year, and it's 12 Angry Men by Sidney Lumet, and screenplay by Reginald Rose. And this was the first movie that Sidney Lumet directed for the cinema. He had previously had some work on TV, but this was his first attempt on cinema direction, and what a fantastic piece of work it is. The cast, well, I'm going to go through all 12 of them because each and every one of them contributes towards a magnificent narrative and magnificent dialogue and a fascinating insight into the workings of the characters. Martin Balsam plays the foreman, and he's somewhat preoccupied with doing his job correctly, getting the process right. He's, of course, Judio number one. Number two is John Fiedler. Note that there is no names for these 12 jury members. There's just numbers. We do not know their names. That's the deliberate part of the legal process, that it's irrelevant who they are, that they are all equal as seen by the legal system, the jury system. So John Fiedler, number two, is a softly spoken sort of nerdy type of character. Number three is Lee J. Cobb. He's a pretty aggressive man with lots of chips on his shoulder about his own son, and he's very much pro a guilty verdict, and 100% certain of that. Also, he states at the beginning of the movie, he makes a statement that basically sums it up. He basically describes that he wouldn't change my mind if we talked for 100 years. Jury number four is E.J. Marshall. He's a South Side voice of reason. He's a very calm, thinking man, weighs up both sides of the coin, and comes to a reasoned decision on the basis of probability. Jack Kluman plays jury number five. He's a gentle sort of a man. He grew up in a slum, and this comes out in the dialogue. Six, Jack Warner. Jack Warner has some baseball tickets in his pocket, and he's itching to get this all over with, a quick guilty verdict. And he's rather brash, is prone to going with hunches, and very sure of himself. Next up is Joseph Sweeney, a very old man who is methodical and he wants to hear the arguments, weighing each piece of evidence up. Then we have Ed Bigley. He's the bigot here. He believes that his view is sacrosanct and everybody else should fall into line. Then we have the immigrant, played by George Voskovich, and he's very much appreciative of being in America, experiencing democracy, and sees his part on the jury as a thanks for being allowed to live here, being seen as a sort of equal citizen amongst all the Americans who were born here. Then we get to number 11, Robert Weber. He's a sort of ad man who views things very much from a business point of view of how to sell, how to convince, how to market. And then finally, 12 is Edward Binns. He's a sort of everyman type of guy, nondescript, And so there we have it. So let's set the scene. Initially we see the courts of justice as the men are moving towards the court, and then we move to the end of the testimony. The judge is advising the jury members of their duty, and as they retire to the jury room, two of them look over at the accused. He's a Puerto Rican teenager. He's been accused of killing his father. He's probably no more than 18. And two witnesses have placed him at the scene. And on the face of it, it looks a little bit of an open and shut case. The jury retired to the room, and there's an attached bathroom. Unfortunately, it's extremely hot, and the air conditioning doesn't seem to be working, and they can't get the fan started. So the environment is not exactly conducive for long debate, although more on that as this review continues. I just want to, first of all, make some points about why I consider this to be a masterpiece. Firstly, the script. It's an extraordinary piece of writing by Rose, probably one of the finest ever written. And this basically allows Lumet carte blanche to direct, knowing that he's got the right words in this movie. It's also an extremely well-worked whodunit, with the reasoning of Fonda and the other juries gradually being chipped away, and the prosecution case going with it, as each member, apart from Fonda, is convinced to change his view of the outcome. It's also a taut thriller. It ratchets up the tension in the room in small doses, and we follow this with a sort of an interest and a passion as we lead towards the confrontations between jurors and the inevitable conclusion. And it's also an absorbing character study. The scenario with these 12 distinct characters with their personalities emerging, their foibles, their beliefs, their baggage, what they actually are carrying into that room, their prejudices and their perceptions of the legal system, what they consider to be morally right and wrong. It's all there, and absolutely extraordinary how all these bits are brought out. And then finally, it's very thought-provoking as a piece of learning material. It forces you as a viewer to look at the whole notion of the legal system, of justice, and the death penalty, the right and wrongs of it. And also, for a psychologist, you have a great view of group behaviour emerging, and how individuals influence other members within the group. It's a tremendous lesson for study in group behaviour. Now, I don't want to go through too much of the plot, but just to say that after the initial raising of hands, we get 11-1 vote, and Fonda's character is the one who is going for not guilty, but he explains this on the basis that he's not sure, and that he wants to hear more. This gets a number of the other juries ratchet up, and we learn very quickly about their particularly Cobb and Begley and Warden to an extent. We get to see how they are impatient, and we already start to perceive that this is going to be quite a emotionally charged jury. We then go through why the 11 members consider him to be guilty, and it's all pretty sketchy, really. There's not a great deal of really perceptive reasoning. A lot of it is just based on how they feel, based on what they think they have heard, based on the fact that they can't see an alternative. And it really puts at the heart of it the notion that a jury system has its faults. The people on it aren't experts at looking at evidence, and it really puts into question the whole notion of choosing 12 members of the public to make a decision about the life and death of an alleged murder suspect. There are some particularly riveting scenes that I want to refer to towards the end, when Begley is ranting about his view, and the vote has gone down to the last couple. It's 10-2 to an acquittal, I recall. And the other members of the jury, we see them in close-up, and then we see that they eventually stand up one by one and move towards the windows and turn their backs on Begley as he rants and raves, and it clearly indicates that they have lost any sense of respect as to what this bigot is saying. And it's an extremely powerful piece of direction by Lumet. It was all done in one take, apparently, and this passing over the seats vacated and the close-ups of the jurors is really riveting, and I really have it stuck in my mind to this day. There's also another brief scene when the second vote of Fonda suggests to the 11 that if they all come back with a guilty plea, he'll go with them and go with a guilty. But he's basically throwing his hat into the ring and giving everything to that particular process. And I found it quite remarkable, this idea of a single silent ballot. It is a secret ballot, and of course one other changes its vote, and this creates absolute bedlam, with Cobb accusing Klugman of switching, which he hasn't, and eventually the old man pops up and says he has, because he wants to hear more. He has an element of doubt, and it's a very significant moment in the movie which changes the direction. Of course, there is quite a lot of politics going on here about belief systems. Lumet, to be sure, is a liberal thinking man, and he's placing some of these issues in front of the viewer through the belief system of the individual jurors. And I welcome this, because for many the justice system does bring out the worst in people, and autocracy and autocratic machinery can really overtake and overcome all else. As the film unfolds and the pieces of evidence are broken down and basically doubt has been cast over them, we witness some tremendous drama. There's the incident involving the switchblade knife. There's the incident regarding an old man walking from his bed to open a door and walk down a corridor. There's the incident with reference to a testimony given by a woman who is short-sighted but isn't wearing her glasses. There's also the cart, the train cart, and the pace in which that travels past a point. All this evidence is brought to the debate, and I think it's absolutely riveting as how each point, the reference to the what the boy saw at the cinema, and also a very powerful moment when at the early part of the discussion, Cobb describes the boy shouting at his father in the room earlier, "I'm going to kill you." And then later on, we have a scenario which leads to a confrontation between Cobb and Fonda. Fonda is far too bright and far too sharp for Cobb, and he responds by losing his temper and saying, "I'm going to kill you." It really is so powerful. So you will need to watch this movie to see how each piece of evidence is thrown away. But in conclusion, it's possibly one of the greatest dramas regarding a courtroom that I've ever seen, and it all take place in this one room. The direction with regard to close-ups, with regard to the use of the room, the table, it's very detailed by Lumet. And basically I've seen this movie now 3 or 4 times, and I could sit down and watch it again right now because the quality is absolutely superb. 12 Angry Men, directed by Sidney Lumet, released in 1957, and it's my number 1 for that year.